All right, it's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life. So, let's go ahead and replace this brake fluid and clean these calipers. I'm going to do this all in one go. Multiple steps, but one go. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rip a little hole in this little rag here. And that's going to slip over my brake fluid reservoir. And what's going to happen, this is like a bib. And if I spill any fluid here or there, it'll hopefully land on that and not on my paint. If you do get any fluid on your paint at all, wipe it up immediately and clean it because it is highly corrosive. So on these Brembo reservoirs, we need a Phillips head screwdriver. There's 2 screws at the top. Go ahead and loosen these little guys up. Like so. And we want to be careful because there's a little rubber cover in here. We don't want that to go flying. There's the cap. The rubber did not come with it, so we can set this cap aside. I usually leave the screws in it. And here's a little rubber cap. We're going to... oh, there goes brake fluid all over the side of my bike. I better clean that up. But that's the little rubber cover that I was talking about. That usually stays with the cap, but in this case it did not. So I'm going to set that in this little bucket, set it aside, and we are going to clean up this mess I just made before I hurt my bike. All right, so mess is cleaned up. Didn't hurt anything. We got it quickly. Now, I've got this little drain pan right here. I've got it sitting on top of my fuel tank, but I've also got a microfiber towel sitting underneath of it. I don't want to scratch my tank in any kind of way, so we're going to balance that right there. I've got my turkey baster that I talked about. Now we're going to depress that, and we're going to suck out this brake fluid. Now be very careful because it will tend to drip out of there. Pour it right in this little container here. Try to do this without spilling anything. All right. All right, other than the initial brake fluid there, we haven't done anything yet. All right, cool. So, this reservoir is now mostly empty. Let's see if I can get the last little bit up here. Sometimes it wants to run out of this thing if it's not a perfect seal here. All right, so there's that. Now, I'm going to set this down here. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go clean this off. I'm just going to use a paper towel and clean this little guy off right here. There's not really any advantage to like getting it perfect. It's really not hurting anything to have brake fluid on this. It sits on top of the brake fluid anyway. So we're going to put our rag down there, and I'm going to set this with my cap that I set aside from before. All right, so that's there. And now we have an empty brake fluid reservoir, and that's going to allow me to compress the calipers. When I compress the calipers, it's going to push brake fluid back through the system, and it's going to fill up the reservoir again. Now, if we were to compress that without getting the brake fluid out of here first, what would happen is the reservoir would get too full, and it could actually overflow, or you may not just be able to compress the caliper. It depends on how good that seal is on the inside, but I've never tried it. My money says that it would probably leak out. We don't want brake fluid leaking out, so we get all the old brake fluid out. Plus, after we compress the calipers, both sides, this fills up. We're going to suck the rest of it out, and then we fill it with new. And what that's going to do is we're going to start with a full reservoir of completely clean, brand new brake fluid, instead of having to flush the whole reservoir down through the system with the dirty fluid. It takes a little bit more time, and you're pushing all that dirty brake fluid through the system. So you might as well just start with clean fluid at the top of the system. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to show you a about compressing these calipers. All right, so I'm going to set that here. Now, a couple of considerations to think about. So, what's going to happen if I compress these brakes? What's going to happen is it's going to push fluid out of here, and it's going to put some of it up in the reservoir, but it also could send some to the other side. And if we put it on the other side, what's going to happen is you could push these pistons all the way out, and then the piston actually comes out of the caliper and falls in, and then you've got brake fluid coming out, and then you have a real disaster on your hands when it comes to putting those pistons back in and getting everything clean. You're going to make a mess. So what I use is this Öhlins fork wrench, and what I use it for is to immobilize a caliper. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So I'm going to take these pads and just push them back a little bit so there's enough room, and then we slip our Öhlins rear shock adjustment wrench right here. And what's going to happen is this is kind of almost the same size as your brake rotor, maybe just a touch thicker. And what's going to happen is as I wrap this with the bungee cord so it can't come out, let's do one more here just for good measure. We don't want this little guy coming out on us, do we? Okay, let's see if I can get this. I'm having a hell of a time here. She don't want to cooperate today, huh? There you go, get on there. All right, cool. So that's not going anywhere. What's going to happen is when I compress that other brake caliper over there, it's not going to allow this to compress. These pads will actually squeeze against this Öhlins wrench, and it'll prevent the caliper, the pistons from getting pushed in too far. All right, so that's that. Now I can go to the other side, and we will go ahead and compress these calipers and get them in a position where we can clean them. All right, so for this side, now we can compress this just fine. I'm going to remove this little bungee cord and let it hang free. You're free, buddy. You're free. All right, so let's see if you can see that. Let me get this camera centered so that you can actually see what the heck is going on here. Hey, how about that? All right, now we're going to go ahead and take these pads out of here. And to do that, we just slip this out like this, and then the pad pops right out. And we got a good pad. There's probably like 4 millimeters, maybe 5. And it looks pretty good. I'm going to just make sure that they're even. This is the outside pad, and this will be the inside pad. Some people recommend rotating these things, but I don't know how I feel about that. Now, this will come out. All right. I'm going to set that on top. Top is the inside pad. Now, we have this little bracket right here. This is just holds spring tension on there, and it's just a little spring. Now, you probably want to take a picture if you're doing this. That way, you'll know how it goes. And in this case, you can see this end goes towards the brake line, and this just comes out of here pretty easy, actually. You just pull it on out, and then we set it off to the side. You don't want to lose it. And then you get it back in, just like that, and install it back in there. It's not a big deal. All right, I'm going to set that to the side. Now, we have 4 pistons right here. We have to compress these things down. There are special tools that you can buy. I don't have the special tool, so I use a channel lock plier. Now, you can do this, and what you do is you very easily push that in. I don't want to scratch up my brake caliper, and this is a pretty aggressive jaw, so what I do is I grab a rag and I just hold it right here. All right, and that way the tool is actually just going to sit on the rag, And now I need to open this jaw up just a little bit. Hard to do this with one hand. There we go. Now what we're going to do is just push this into the caliper. Let's see, is that at the right angle for you guys to see? Now you're going to see some of these other ones, they may push out a little bit. And what we do is, as we push one in, see how it pushes the one that I just pushed back. So we're going to do that, and we're just going to work them. If these ones over here start to come out too far, you're going to want to compress those. So what I'm going to do now is move this rag over to this side. And it's very hard to see, I know, the lighting in here is terrible. I'm going to nice and slowly push that in. You know, I've got almost no resistance on this thing at all. So that looks pretty good right there. These came out just a bit, and I'm just going to keep working them till all four of them are nice and easy pushed in there. All right, so now when I remove my rag, you can see that all four calipers are now pushed in. The next step is to go ahead and spray these things down. What I use is some simple green, and we're going to grab the toothbrush, and I'm just going to get in there. All right, so I've got a toothbrush, and I got a spray bottle with some simple green in it. Probably want to put a rag under here to catch any dirty fluid. You can also run some cardboard, whatever you like, but all we're going to do here is just spray on the inside like so. Just get around these pistons. It actually looks really clean in here. I guess that's a plus side about doing this multiple times a year. Now all we're going to do is just sit there and clean. Just use a spare toothbrush. You don't have to use anything in particular. You don't have to buy anything specific. I run an electric toothbrush, so I don't have any spare toothbrushes. I went to Target and I got this set right here. It was like 2 for 95 cents. And that'll be good enough. Now just get in there, work around the pistons. And just get down in each and every crevice. I really like to get in there and get it clean because I'm got my little OCD here about doing things and keeping them clean and having clean brake calipers. The reason I'm doing this, if I failed to mention it before in a way that you could understand it, I'm doing this to keep the caliper pistons free. I don't want them to get all corroded with brake dust, and I don't want them to get any extra resistance. So if you get a couple of these pistons stuck inside the brake caliper, what happens is you get 2 or 3 of the pistons that will come out, and maybe one is stuck. So then you get uneven brake pad wear, and you're not getting a full grip from the pads onto the rotor. All right, and where that bracket was, I'm just going to clean in there and get a little bit of brake dust off of here. And we'll just work it in here. These are already really clean, so not really, these things probably really, I could have gotten away with riding on them for a little while. All right, now here is the real dangerous part. This is where you can really fuck up. I'm going to depress the brake lever a little bit, and I'm going to push these pistons out. So I'm going to make sure that they come out evenly. If one of them comes out halfway and the other one comes out fully, and this one comes out halfway and this one's fully, I'll know that the ones that have a little bit more resistance on them are going to tend to need a little bit more scrubbing and get some of that brake fluid off of there. So what I do is I reach over here across the motorcycle, and I'm just going to hit the brake rotor. You should be able to see these pistons, I hope. All right, see this? You've got this piston right here, and that piston right there came out immediately. The others, not so much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press this in with my finger. Actually, you know what? Before I push those in with my finger, I'm going to scrub them just a little bit more. All right, so we've got a couple of pistons, and these are uneven, and this is why we do this. So I'm going to actually spray these right here. Spray all 4 pistons. All right, and we're going to add a little bit more attention to these things here. All right, we're going to get around here. Since these are almost fully out anyways, might as well clean them and rinse them off before we push them back in. And then we'll get the ones that need a little bit more attention in a few more minutes. So we're just going to scrub around the circumference of each piston like so. Really get in there and work it. All right. And then, once we're done with that, we don't want to push any simple green back into the caliper. So what I'm going to do is grab some brake fluid and just spray it down and rinse it off. We got us some brake clean here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and spray that down in there. Give her a nice little rinse. And then I'm going to push these 2 pistons back in carefully. Sometimes they take a little bit of force, but this one's actually working pretty well. Push that one back in. And this one came back out a little bit. And then this one came back out just a little bit. All right. So now what I'm going to do is try to press these other pistons out just a little bit more. Looks like this one came out quite a bit. This is where it would really help to have an assistant. You can actually hold these while somebody squeezes the brake lever, and that would work pretty well. But I got to try to finagle this by myself since I don't have any help. Let's see what we got here. Oh yeah, that's working lovely. All right, so I'm pushing that. Now you can see that this piston came out. These other came out just a little bit, but this is the one that we wanted to really work on. So I'm going to hit that with some simple green. And then we're going to scrub this one. All right, so that's good. Alrighty, sweet. All right, so we got some attention here. Now, I'm going to take a little bit more of this brake clean and just give her a good little rinse-a-roo. And then I'm going to push this back in. I'm going to push these 2 pistons back in because it kind of came out a little easy like. There we go. There we go. That one came in. So we got these pushed back nice and easy. Now we're going to try to get this piston. Now I'm sure one of you guys out there has to have a better solution for this than what I have. If so, if you have something or an idea, please let me know, because I used to be a technician, but I'm by no means an expert at any of this. So I'm just a do-it-yourselfer. There we go. All right. Now, that piston is out. This piston came out as well. So I'm just going to push these back a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to take, you guessed it, more simple green. Sorry if you saw the side of my face. All right, here we go. Let's give this a little scrub-a-roo. All right. Get all that brake fluid off of there. All right. Now, we're going to go ahead and rinse again. Brake cleaner. All right. And then we'll push this back. See, that pushes back nicely now. Still has a little bit more resistance than the other 3, but I feel like this one does too, but this one was one of the first ones that popped out, so okay. So now this is all clean and ready to go. It's all rinsed off. And the only step that we have left to do with this caliper is to put the brake fluid or brake pads back into it. I got the brake calipers all cleaned up. They're ready to go. Don't have to do anything more with those. But if you'll notice here, there's a little bit more fluid that flowed back up into the reservoir. So we're going to go ahead and get that little bit out. It's not a whole lot, probably just a little eyedropper full, but let's see what we got here. Yeah, just a little bit. But that all came up when I compressed the pistons back into the brake calipers. No big deal, that is normal. Now, we are going to start with some fresh brake fluid. So I'm back with my Motul RBF 660 brake fluid here. Now, you can see when I closed this before that it is sealed. So it was not able to soak in, at least I hope it didn't soak in any water. It hasn't been sitting that long, honestly, but if I do get to the racetrack and it feels a little bit soft, I will go ahead and change it back out. So I'm going to fill up the reservoir here, and I'll fill it up all the way without making it overflow. The reason I'm going to fill it up that far, even past the max fill line, is because I'm going to install this front tire on the bike. When I install the front tire, after I get the brake rotors and everything set, which I'm going to show you how to do, we're going to compress the calipers, and that's going to push the pads up against the rotors, and some of the fluid that's in here is going to get pushed down, so it's going to drop the level in the reservoir, and I don't want it to run empty. So exactly like before, these brake calipers are in the way. We don't want them bouncing around and hitting our wheels and scratching them up. So I'm going to go ahead and tie them up out of the way. That way we don't scratch anything. All right, here we go. I'm going to check out our axle, and it's a little bit dirty. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe this off first and get it nice and clean, and then we will go ahead and put the tire on. We have a tire. We know that the wheel speed sensor's here, the wheel speed reluctor wheel is here, and since we had our experience before, this is on the left hand side. The axle on the other side will take up the slack against the wheel bearing. So here we go. This comes in like so. Get my axle ready. Lift this up. This is kind of awkward. Okay, so now we're in. Now we're in this side. Okay, so we've got that in there now. And now remember we had a washer on this side. We've got our nut. And now comes the complicated part. Okay, now that we've got our axle on, let's talk about something that's a little bit complicated to understand. Get that hair off of there. All right, so this end is the captive side, and then over here we have the free side. So let me explain this in a way that hopefully you can understand. When we push this axle in or out, this side is free to move, it's free to spin. And then on this side, what happens is this nut tightens down and it tightens the fork leg up against the spacer, which tightens it up against the wheel bearing. All right, so this is the captive side, this is the free side. Now, if I try to go ahead and spin this to get it tight, all that's going to happen is that the axle on this side is going to spin freely. We're not going to be able to get the proper torque. So now that I have it seated and it looks good, everything looks fine, we have to tighten these pinch bolts. Now we don't tighten them very tight. We just want to snug them up. Let me get them by hand here. And just on this side for now. All right, so that's snug. That's not going anywhere. And then what we'll do is get a torque wrench and torque this to spec. So what is the proper torque that we need to set this to? Well, we've got front wheel pin nut, M25 by 1.5, that's 1.5, that's good. We're going to torque it to 89 Newton meters or 59 pound-feet of torque. That's why it helps to have a service manual for your motorcycle so you can quickly look up all of the torque settings. Okay, so my handy dandy digital Snap-on Torque Wrench 2000 decided to die on me. Luckily I got my old trusty rusty backup here, my Matco one, manual torque wrench. I've locked it in at 59 foot-pounds, which is 80 Newton meters, which is what this what it says. So let's go ahead and torque this little champ down. All right, so that is torqued. And another good thing to do after you finish using your torque wrench, you want to unlock it and spin it all the way back down. So let's do that now. The reason we do that is because if you keep it spun up, there's a spring in here, and that spring will be under tension the whole time, and it could actually go out of calibration. So we're locked back at 0, and this is now torqued. Now that we have the axle on this side torqued to spec, basically this nut is torquing the axle up against the spacer. We still have the free leg over here, which is free to move back and forth, except that the pinch bolts are kind of tight. So we are going to back these off. All right. And now that they are backed off, make sure that's 100 bit, that's loose there. All right, sweet. Now we can move that and make sure that it's free to go. We're going to lower the bike down. So we'll put some, there goes my audio recorder. Sorry if you got your eardrums blown out, but we're going to drop the front stand nice and gently because the rear stand does not have a tire on it. All right. Now, what I'm going to do without pulling on the brakes, I'm going to move the motorcycle up and down a little bit. And what that's going to do is allow the axle to center up against the wheel. All right. So now that we've got that, we'll put the bike back in the air. There it goes. And now, should be good to go. Should be nice and settled. Now we can take and torque these down. Let's go ahead and put these here. Now, if you want to get really anal with this, you can torque them. They're, it says right on the side of the fork, 10 Newton meters. That's what seems about 10 Newton meters to me. It's not all that important. Use our German torque spec of good and tight, but don't over tighten it because you can break it. It's a small bolt, it's only an M6. All right, that feels like about 10 to me. Feels like about 10 to me right there. Okay, cool. Now, that guy spins for days, so we know we got it right. Now that we've got that out of the way, it is now time to install the brake calipers. So here we go. Okay, now this and many other Brembo style calipers do not have a locating pin, meaning that they are flat right here. There is no way to really center this on the rotor itself. So we have to actually torque these in a very specific way in order to make sure that they're centered. If they're not centered and they wiggle just a little bit, your calipers may actually be out of alignment with the rotor. They may actually be diagonal. Or they could be all the way to the left or all the way to the right, which means that these pistons on this side would come out more than the pistons on this side, and then you get like an offset brake balance here. So we want to make sure that they're good and centered. So what we're going to do is just fit them onto the rotor like so. We're going to grab our bolts. Now there's a spacer. Make sure you don't forget the spacer. It goes in between the caliper and the fork, and then you put the bolt through, and then you thread it on by hand. All right, so we're going to thread that on down. Before I get too involved there, I am going to get the spacer on this side inserted. We're going to do this and bring it on down. Now we want to install these finger tight. Why is that? Well, see how this can move just a little bit? We want to be able to allow it to center itself up and move on its own. There's just a little bit of slop in here, and we're going to make sure that the caliper is perfectly centered on the rotor. So finger tight, nothing more. Don't hammer it down too hard, just get it finger tight. There we go. Still free to move just a little bit. I can feel that movement in there. All right, so now that we've got this done on both sides, we're just getting these things nice and finger tight. Now what we're going to do is take the brake pads and we are going to compress them. I'll start spinning the wheel. We'll get them all compressed down. There may be a little bit of air in the system, which is not allowing me to get any brake pressure. Yeah, there's a lot of air in there is all. Yeah, we're getting a little bit of brake pressure now. See, there we go. There we go. There's just some air in the system from me sucking out that brake fluid. Okay, so what we're going to do is hit the brakes, spin the wheel, hit the brakes, spin the wheel, hit the brakes, spin the wheel, hit the brakes, and eventually what we're going to do is work that air through. There we go. That's what I wanted to see. That's what we want. Spin the wheel, lock it down. Spin the wheel, lock it down. Spin the wheel, lock it down. Now, I'm going to hold the brake pressure all the way as hard as I can. And now, I'm going to go ahead and tighten these things. They're not going to be torqued, at least not yet. But what I want is just for them to get snug so they don't move. So now we know that with all the pistons pushed, this is fully up against the rotor. I'm still holding brake pressure on the handlebar. I'm going to come around to the other side of the bike, and I'm going to tighten that one and tighten this one. There we go. So now we know that they're perfectly tight. And it spins nice and free. So we know we got it right. Now at this point, The wheel is good. We're all torqued up. These pinch bolts are tight. We always just make a little once over. These are tight. The spacers are in. It's the same thing on this side. So now we can get on with actually bleeding the brakes and replacing all of our brake fluid. Now to bleed the brakes, we are going to need an 8mm wrench. Got this little ratchet wrench. What we're going to do is take this off here. Just pull that off and take this off. And what we're going to do is just set it right here. Still a little bit wet from the Simple Green and the brake cleaner. So what I'm going to do is wipe it first. There we go. All right. So the idea is to break this loose. I'm going to break it loose first, and then I'm going to immediately tighten it back up. So I'm just going to break it loose by hand and then immediately tighten it back up. All I want to do is just make sure that we can get it loose and it's not going to spin, and then we tighten it right back up. Now I'm going to hook the hose up to it, and we are going to pump all of this brake fluid through the brake lines. Okay, remember when I said that the brake fluid reservoir, the level would go down? Well, look at it now. That was all the way topped off before I brought those rotors up against the pads up against the rotors. So what we're going to do is start with, sorry about that. We're going to start with a nice full brake fluid reservoir. All right, and we're going to keep it full the entire time, or relatively full, as we pump this thing through. We do not want the brake fluid level in here to get low while we're bleeding it, because we don't want this line right here to suck air. If it starts to suck air, like it did earlier, it's going to pump the air right into here and then down through your brake lines and then all the way through the bike to the ABS module and then all the way back to your front calipers, and it's going to take a lot of fluid to get all of that air out. So here we go. Time to start bleeding. I've got my little brake bleeder right here. I'm not even going to hook it up to the air right now. I don't feel like I need to. Stick that right there on the nipple. That's what she said. I am going to try to find a way to secure this so I don't drop it. There we go, and there we go. All right, so that's going to stay right there. Now we're going to take our wrench and fit that like so. I want to get it in a spot where I can move freely up and down. So down and then back up to tight, and then down and then back up to tight. So before we loosen this, what we're going to do is pump the brake lever a few times. We're going to hold the brake pressure. We're going to crack this bolt loose, and then we're going to tighten it, and then I'm going to add some more brake fluid or brake pressure. I'm going to loosen and then tighten. As I hold the brake pressure, let go. Bada boom, bada bing. Now every time that I let go, or that I loosen this nut, the brake lever moves all the way back up against the hand grip. So we're just going to do that a few times. And every time that we do this, some more fluid is going to go out of this reservoir. And I'm going to take this off because I don't feel like I really need it right this minute. But you'll watch the reservoir level come down. And when it gets down to about halfway, I'm going to top it off with brake fluid. So we're going to do this. We're going to work it through. Work all the air out of the system. Usually you wouldn't have this much air, but I made a mistake. I sucked the reservoir a little bit too much, and then I compressed those pistons and it sucked some air into the system. So what we want to do is just pump it up until you get kind of a firm brake lever, and then release the pressure. Pump it up till it's firm, release. Pump it up till it's firm, release. Pump it up till it's firm, taking a lot right now. Release. What that might mean is that there's some air in the top. So before I go any further, what I'm going to do, take this off. What you want to do is wipe that off. Anytime that comes off of there, get the brake fluid off of your caliper. You don't want it on there. I'm going to come up here. I know we're supposed to do this last, but I feel like I need to do it right now because I think there's just too much air in the master cylinder. So we're going to throw this little guy on here. Clipper on. Find a place to clip this, which can be a pain sometimes. That's why some of those one-man bleeder kits are better than this, but this is just what I use. Your mileage may vary. Let's get this out of the way of the brake lever. All right, there we go. Now, I need a different size wrench. I believe this is an 11 millimeter, so I'm gonna go get that now. And it is an 11, so I'm gonna build some brake pressure, release it. There we go. Oh, that's way better already. There we go. Yeah, there was lots of air right up here in the top. There we go. All right, that's much better. This is the last step usually to bleed the master cylinder, so I'm gonna wait till the very end and I'll finish bleeding the master cylinder. I was pumping mostly air out of here, so it wasn't working for me and it was taking forever to get this one bled. So let's stick this little guy back on there. Now we'll wrap this right here like so. All right. Whenever this gets full, we got to empty it, obviously. All right. Oh, so much more firm. Still not great, but a lot more than it was. There we go. Ooh, yeah. Oh yeah, pump it, baby, pump it. All right, so we're about halfway done with the reservoir. So it's time to top it back off. There we are. Don't have a whole lot left, but look at this. That's as hard as I can pull. Only getting just a little bit of movement. So we know there's no more air in the system. So let's continue just to pump some more fluid out. All I want to do is just make sure that I get most of the old fluid out at least. I'm going to make sure that this is tight. We don't want to over tighten it because then you'll break your caliper. You don't want to strip your caliper out. That would be a bad day. So just snug it up. And then we're going to have our paper towel ready for when we remove this to catch any brake fluid that might come out and drip down the side of your caliper. I'm going to set this like so. I'm going to do a good scrubbing right here just to get all of the residual moisture or anything off of this here. This was a little bit wet, so what I'm going to do is just wipe that off, get anything that was in there out, and that's good. And now what we're going to do is fit this like so, and then we put the cap on it. Just give it a little bit of wipe for good measure, and that's all she wrote. Now we're going to do the same exact thing you just saw. We're just going to do it over there and finish the job. And once I get done with that, then I'll rebleed the master cylinder. Now that you guys have seen me do that, I don't have to show that anymore. And then after I bleed that, I'm going to just top this up to the max fill level, and then we'll put our cap on. All right, let's go ahead and torque these little guys down. These call for 50 Newton meters on this bike. There we go. Okay, now we're going to move to the other side. All right, now our brake calipers are torqued, our axles torqued, the brake rotors are centered. We've got plenty of brake pressure. I can't even pull that back any further than that. So the front end is 100% solid, ready to go. Nothing left to do. And then now it's time to clean the chain and get the rear brakes cleaned and bled and new fluid. And then we'll install the new rear tire and we will be good to go.